Welcome back to the show, everybody. As always, this is your inside track to success. I'm your host, Stewart Kraintz. We have another amazing guest for you this week. She's somebody that has been referred to me by my wife, Jennifer, who has been on the show a couple of times, and her episodes have done super well. You guys love them and wanted to make sure we had this individual on the show. She is somebody that is the founder and head coach of an organization called WeInspireWe, and she herself has 20 plus years of experience coaching leaders and organizations on leadership and also their personal development skills as well. She holds certifications through the International Coaching Federation and also is a master practitioner for the Energy Leadership Index. Quite frankly, y'all, I think we're going to learn a ton from her today, especially as the calendar has rolled over for the new year. Want to welcome Tami Chapek on the show. Tami, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, and I want to kick this off right away. As we learn a bit more about you, this is a time of year where folks are thinking about their goals, thinking about what they want to change for the next 12 months or so. In your work that you do with leaders, executives, what does change look like? Like, what do the people that you work with focus on typically, and how do you support them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I can answer it probably in 100 different ways because,
Of
as you
course.
know, every coaching client is different in what their needs and hopes and dreams are. But broadly speaking, I love this time of year because of exactly what you just said. It's the time of reflection, a time of what do I want to happen differently or more of the same for the coming year. And what I do with my clients as well as myself is sit down and kind of make that become some kind of a vision statement or goal. I do kind of stick to SMART goal rules, and that it has to be specific and it has to be measurable. The rest we can tie around that. But the biggest thing we do is focus on what is it and the why, right? So really tapping into what's driving that change, what's your need for change, so that you can start to like feel it, live it, breathe it to make that real change happen. And then the other thing we do that I think most people fall down in this capacity is say, okay, I'm going to change today. There we go. And it doesn't really work that way. So we break it into teeny tiny, I say like baby little steps, so that each week or each day or each month, we're adding one little thing to it so that it grows and becomes more of a habit, more of the actual, sustainable change, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, and thank you for bringing that up because this is something I talk about a lot. I've talked about it a lot on this show, actually. The whole new year, new me, everybody gets so excited to basically go from 0 to 100.
Yep.
You know, they're going to sign up for all the classes, join all the gyms, whatever the thing is. And it is that incremental change that is more sustainable oftentimes. And just in the amount of experience you've had, how do you communicate that type of shift when somebody is so excited about having it all right here, right now?
Yeah, it's a great, everybody's a little bit different in that. And so I really talk to my clients around what's going to work best for them. There are some people who are better with extremes when trying to figure out how to like make a, shock to their system to have that kind of change start. There are some people that are better with the tiny baby steps. And I would candidly say most people, whether they realize it or not, are better with baby steps because of the overwhelmingness that happens with big change. But what we do is we treat it as a little bit of exploration. So it's try this. Let's do this for a week. Let's do this for 2 weeks and let's see what sticks. And if something doesn't stick, let's dig into the why and assess, okay, did it not stick because it was too much at once? Or did it not stick because that's not really the why of what we're connecting to for the bigger change anyways? And so when you kind of reframe it to be not about like overnight change and like sticking hard to it, but more about exploration, that also helps in that, the baby steps and then the sustainable change to really come into fruition, because you're testing the water, you're seeing what works, what doesn't work, to come up with the best possible solution for you.
Yeah, I feel like I'm hearing you say it's about collecting those data points in terms of what works and doesn't work.
Yeah, and what I tell my clients is to pay attention to not only, what becomes natural, what feels good to them, but really what their body says in the process of it, because our bodies are our biggest sensory, right? Which tells us what's natural to us, what feels good, what doesn't. And when it doesn't feel good, there's a reason why. It could be that it's just uncomfortable because it's something new, or you're trying to create something that's different, and that's okay, right? Or it could be because this isn't exactly the way it's going to work out for you in the long run. And so really paying attention to those signals and aligning to those things can make for, again, that more sustainable, the stickiness of change versus, again, the kind of all or nothing that we tend to come out with.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like you're the right person to ask this follow-up question just because you work with high achievers, people in organizations where maybe there's just a lot of pressure to create the change, create that end result in a very short amount of time. How do you propose, coach people into taking that time to pause, to check in with themselves when they're dealing with all of this pressure to, beat the last quarter's lagging sales numbers or whatever the situation may be?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing around that is expectation setting, and both for themselves as well as for the people around them, right? So when you have these high pressure goals or all this extra pressure that's coming onto you, I think it is important to have communication around what it is, how to get there, that there is some exploration into it, especially let's use the sales quota as the example here, right? Like that is not an overnight switch, and anybody who says that it is has never been in sales before, right? It takes effort, and there's a sales cycle, a lead to it. So everybody, you need to kind of manage expectations on what the reality is of the situation. So as we're getting into these behavioral, attitudinal, physical changes for individuals, right? We need to understand what that timeline might look like and what the expected results might look like, right? And so it's one thing to say like, yes, I want to change overnight, right? But that's going to be a short-term win that probably is going to result in some regression. And
Mhm.
so, talking to your leadership, you want this as a short-term win, or you want this to be something that's going to stick? Maybe not use those exact words, right? But it is about managing expectations, kind of understanding what's going to work best to then determine the best steps or the path forward.
Is it possible to manage expectations when the audience whose expectations you're trying to manage are not necessarily receptive?
Yeah, it is, right? And it comes with some hard conversations. And sometimes coaching gets into a lot of like, how do I deliver this message in a way that people will receive
Sure.
it? And it is about, laying out the groundwork in a way that's a win-win for both parties involved, right? Like you have this expectation of me and I'm working towards this. So I can either do it this way or I can do it this way, and really getting into the brass tacks of why it's going to work or not, and just laying all that information out on the table to allow self and others to come to the same conclusion. And when that's said, when it's put in that framework, it's definitely the win-win, but analyzing the pros and cons of approaches, right? It's going to allow everybody to say, okay, right, like actually, let's take a step back here. What are we really trying to work for? And what do we want to see? If it is that, again, that short-term win, why? And if that's it, then understand that this can happen for this quarter, maybe, but not for the next.
I love that. I love that. And thank you for explaining that a bit further. Something that comes up for me, comes up for the folks I coach, and just a lot of the conversations I have in general is standing in power, like standing in one's own personal power. The situation we just described is owning your power, possibly standing for what's right, standing for what you believe in. How does somebody learn to do that over time? Obviously, that's a pretty high leverage situation we just described, but maybe more in the everyday life, in the workplace, and their home. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
I always say that self-awareness is half the battle, and then the rest is what you do with that. And I think that falls true into the standing in your personal power, right? First and foremost, you have to understand what it is, what your power is, where your strengths are, what your values are, like really getting deep into the understanding of the you first and foremost, so that you can then start to understand, what kind of power you have, what it is that you want to lean into, or how you might want to grow that over time too. And then it's starting to do something with it, right? So as you realize, like, gosh, I have a strength in this capacity that could be used more, or I'd like to lean into this more because this isn't a strength of mine, whatever that looks like. And then starting to find ways to vocalize it, whether it's, in one-on-ones with your manager, expressing to your peers around you, to your team, Vulnerability is a huge part of this, and saying, this is where I want to grow, or this is how I feel like I can add the most to the company or the situation. And then allowing their support and other things to come into play for that in that capacity. So, kind of similar to the expectations conversation, a huge part of owning your personal power is figuring out how to communicate it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And we had a guest on this show named Sarah Moore who just came out with a book entirely on vulnerability and how that's tied to our personal power. I feel like I'm doubling down on the same questions, but I'm interested in what you have to say, and I know the audience will be as well. We often are find ourselves in containers, whether it's work or just society at large, where we need to put on a face. We need to put on this persona. I mean, social media is all about putting on a mask,
Life is
relatively
great.
speaking. Yeah, and when we lived on LinkedIn, it's promoting a very specific image of ourselves, or Instagram specific image, but in a different way. What does vulnerability look like in the coaching you do and encouraging your clients to do so?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's no hard and fast answer to that because it is so subjective and personal and situational. And so, when you think about vulnerability, it's about exposing a part of ourselves, whether it's a weakness, an area we're concerned about, whatever that looks like. It's this thing that we've been taught over the years, especially people my age, right? That you should never confess these things. You never commit or confess your weaknesses. You never state
Mhm.
areas where you're struggling. But younger generations are teaching us that that's actually not super healthy. And the more we open ourselves up, the greater the relationship, the greater the connections, the greater the output. So when it comes to vulnerability, I always think about and coach my clients to think about, what it is that would be beneficial to enhance that relationship, that would help allow them to get the support that they need, or others to see that they're human, that allow them to then open up and be vulnerable too. And so it is being thoughtful and intentional with the information that you're sharing, but also in knowing that there's a win to it. There's an upside to it that we're never really taught to do. So it's
Mhm.
uncomfortable for sure, but the more we do it, it doesn't mean bearing your soul and confessing to all
Right.
the deep dark secrets that you have, right? But opening yourself up to be human.
Yeah. You touched on it, but just to say it plainly to the audience, being vulnerable doesn't mean bearing your soul for everybody and for the world. You do get to be selective about who you open yourself up to in that way, but just know that, there is a possible reward at the end of putting yourself out there in that way, allowing people to see you for who you are, your ideas for what they are, and living that life of authenticity and claiming your power in that way.
Absolutely. And vulnerability is such an interesting, and I'm going to use the word tool, right? Or tool in our toolbox, because you can use it very strategically in knowing that it's going to open things up in relationships in particular. It also will allow other people to, certainly open themselves up, but to be more open to being more supportive, being more understanding. It brings humanity into a working situation that oftentimes doesn't feel that way, especially when you have those big targets in front of yourself. It's just, I think it's a really beautiful thing. And, thank goodness that Brene Brown really kind of broke those conversations open for people. I think, not to get into gender stereotypes, but women historically have been more vulnerable with each other, but not so
Mhm.
much with the masses, right? And men tend to not be vulnerable at all because they're taught at a young age, you can't
Mhm.
cry, you can't do these things. So the more that we realize and expose like the innermost parts of ourselves, not the deep dark secrets, right? But like the parts of ourselves that allows us to have more again, I'm going to repeat the same phrase, more connections with each other. It enhances relationships, it enhances output.
Yeah, and I tell this story pretty frequently, but I was employed by the New York Yankees back in the day, and that was an environment where it was just grind, 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 go, 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 sleep when you're dead, make the
Mhm.
sales calls, bring in the revenue. And I actually find that it's taken several years for me to undo that type of conditioning to just
Mhm.
be a robot, be a machine each and every day that can get up and make 100 calls and get yelled at on the phone when things don't go well for the customer. And, I hope anybody listening to this is hearing that it's okay to be human. It is okay to talk to your manager possibly about what's coming up for you, because change can't happen if
Yeah.
you don't express what's coming up.
Yeah. And I will just add just a leadership tidbit, as a leader of others, whether it's a title or just a behavior, right? We know that these younger generations coming in will not stay in a place where they don't feel like they can be themselves, where they feel
Mhm.
valued and accepted. And that cannot happen without vulnerability. So anyone who's, leading younger people, right, that's an expectation. That's like cost of entry for that working relationship. And without it, those you will have lots of turnover without even really understanding why. And so I think it's something we really have to learn how to embrace more. Dip your toe in the water, right? Like share a
Yeah.
personal story and to kick off a meeting, whatever it is, right? But it's something that is going to be required for us to be successful, at least in the U.S. market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, Tammy, obviously you can't name names, but in your coaching, do you have any examples of an organization, a leadership team making a big change in this regard, and how it supported the workplace and the bottom line, let's be honest?
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, right? Because I think, historically, if we look at, not to be all generational again, but I'm going to go there for a second. We look at the boomer generation, right? Who tend to be our C-suite executives that we have in place right now. They were taught work hard, 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 hard. Like the description you were describing for, the New York Yankees, like it's all about the work. Then we have millennials who came in and were like, yeah, that's probably right, but maybe we can add a little bit of balance into the middle of this. And then we have millennials who say, it's going to be about balance. I'm going to figure my life out, and I'm also going to just own what I do without having to like work so hard and prove it. I'm going to assume that I have it and go forward. Then you got these Gen Zers who are coming in, right? Who say on the very flip side of everything, right? Like it's not about doing it the same way that you've always done it before. It's about doing it the best way. And that might be more efficiently or effectively or whatever,
Mhm.
right? And so there's all these interesting shifts in people's mindsets about, where their value is coming from, whether it's the output or it's about personal relationships or their own value of feeling valued and giving value, whatever those things are. And so I've had so many leaders over this past year in particular, and especially coming out of COVID, saying like, how do I connect with these
Yeah.
younger generations? I don't understand them. I don't, we're not working well together. I'm not able, I feel like we're talking different languages, like, all the things. And I can't tell you how many clients I've had this conversation with, right? And at the end of the day, the solution has been across the board, get to know them, understand their motivators, their drivers, the things that they make them tick, the areas they feel like they want to grow in, and the rest then follows. It becomes so much more easier
Mhm.
to step into a stronger leadership relationship, to be able to keep them, retain them, motivate, inspire them, all the things. And then there's back on us, right? So as we do more to get to know them, we get fed more ourselves. And so it's this nice, beautiful, like symbiotic relationship that grows out of it. And then, yes, by default, because all these things are gelling and clicking better, the output at work, the quality is optimized, the productivity is optimized, the amount of things that people can do, and the creativity that comes into it is optimized. And there's study after study after study that you can just Google it, right? And you'll see that as more and more of those things click together, the better the results and better business goals and all the things.
Hearing you share that actually brings up a quote that I think about a lot. It's Zig Ziglar, who I think is actually part of the greatest generation. So, actually, before the baby
Before the
boomers,
boomers.
he always says, or he said, excuse me, we can have whatever we want in life as long as we help enough people get what they want. And I feel like that encompasses what you're saying. Like, we all want to make a living. We all want to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is, part of the fabric of being an American. And because of our different life experiences generationally, how we get there and what that looks like is different. But if we're all at least rowing in the same direction of supporting one another and creating what we want organizationally, it supports everybody in getting the job done. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think it's always important, and I always saw it's a simple question, right? Like, what is it? What do you want out of this job, right? Who are you as a person? What gives you energy? What motivates
Mhm.
you? And the more you understand those things, the more that you can bring opportunities or position opportunities, frankly, for the benefit of the people involved. If this isn't an area of interest, right, then maybe that's not the best assignment for that person. Or if it is, you want to caveat it with, this is a one-time thing, or this is something that I know won't be easy for you, but it's going to help you grow in this capacity, and giving them enough information, right, to be able to sink their teeth into it in a meaningful way versus go do the thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to pivot the conversation a little bit at this point. You have built an amazing coaching business, which, I think speaks for itself, some of the clientele that you've had. And anybody that wants to check out more about Tami and We Inspire We, please check out the website, weinspirewe.com. I would just love to hear it from you directly, though, Tami. Like, what prompted you to build the business and support the clientele that you work with?
Yeah, thank you. When I started the business, it was just me, but I always had aspiration to have it be a team. I feel like we are all better together than individually. And I believe, and the whole company is founded on the belief that everybody is a leader, regardless, and this is my quote, regardless of title, tenure, age, or gender, right? We all have the
Yes.
ability to be a leader, and we all lead in all capacities of our lives. I think we tend to look at it as this is just when I get a title, right? But we lead our families, we lead our friends, we lead ourselves. I mean, it really starts with self-leadership, right? But so we're all leaders. And my whole mission is to really redefine or change the way that we think about leadership. And so that it's not, right, like I said, the title, right? It's about that attitude, it's about behaviors that allow you to show up as the best possible version ever, right? And to be able
Mhm.
to move self and others forward. So the whole basis of my company is on this belief that, we all inside of ourselves have these really amazing things, these gifts, these talents, these strengths, these skills, and nobody is like us. We have people that maybe have gone through similar training programs or similar years of experience, right? But nobody has the same combination of things. And that on its own is what makes us the great leader that we can be. However, when we go through corporate leadership programs, we read books on leadership, and they're all kind of forged on this path of you must behave in this way. To be a good boss, you must do these things. And that's not necessarily true. So, our whole premise as a company is about redefining that to be about leaning into what you've got, certainly growing and continuing to evolve as a person, but understanding what you've got to offer, and bringing that to light more and more, and helping then the people around you fill in some of those gaps. There's so much evidence on diversity in approach, diversity in thinking, diversity
Mhm.
in the experiences that allow for so much better outcomes and results. And feel like I keep saying outcomes and results all the time, but ultimately, what we're trying to do is to inspire more of that, allow us to not try to change who we are, lean into who we are, our values, our gifts, our strengths, right, and allow then the combination of the world around us to bring the best out. So we as a team collectively, I have 8 coaches, including myself, and then I have an additional job seeker specialist, who we basically help people kind of figure out the things. Who are you? And what do you want to do with that in different capacities? Sometimes it's pure leadership development, sometimes it's career changes, sometimes it's complete career pivots. We have done a handful of those, and just pathways to get you there. The last thing I'll say, just like business plug, right? So we do coaching, individual and group, we do leadership training programming, and we do keynote speaking presentations as well as outplacement services.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to follow up with this question specifically on the career work you guys do. I know that somebody listening to this at some point in the future is probably thinking to themselves, I am miserable in my current role. For whatever reason, maybe they've mastered the role and they're bored. Maybe, they don't feel like they're getting the recognition that they need or deserve. Whatever the case may be, they are in a place of, I know I need to get out of
Yeah.
this, but I don't know where I want to go. How does that coaching start with somebody in that position?
Yeah, it's a great question. And candidly, that was the bulk of our coaching during COVID. When the world shut down, I can't tell you how many people came out of the woodwork saying, I can't do this anymore. I need to change, in whatever capacity that is. So we start out with a couple of different tools depending on the self-awareness of the who you are question. And really dig into what are those things that are your natural gifts and talents? What are the skills that you have? And not only looking at that as an inventory list, but also then analyzing it by where energy and joy from. Like, yes, I can do this thing, but I hate it. Or yes, I can do this thing and I love it. I want to do more of it. So we try to kind of come at it from that lens of what can you do today? Even if there's growth opportunities, no problem, right? But like, what are those things today? And then what do you find joy in? And then bringing those two together, then to say, okay, in these areas that you find joy, then what can you do with that, right? Is that a same job, but in a different company, where maybe it's a different value slash cultural fit? Is
Mm,
it seeking promotion because you're bored and ready to go to something new? The things you're doing align well, right? You're getting joy from them. You've lost touch for a bit. Or is it that you're out of your values, like what you're doing isn't really in line to the things that really fill you up the most? And that might be then the career pivot or things that come into change. So we do that, and depending on the person, that can be a session, it could be two or three. I mean, it varies based again on how much self-discovery and awareness that person has. And then it's always then rolling into okay, so we've landed on these powerful insights. Now, what do you want to do with it? Sometimes it's immediate change. Sometimes it's long-term planning, right? Sometimes there's new skills that I need to develop to get into a more of a pivot or a promotional change, or I'm ready to take those steps right now. And so it's really analyzing that, putting that plan together. And then the coaching comes into play to help reach those baby steps, sustainable change, right? Along the way with accountability. And I find that especially when you're making bigger career changes, that's where nervousness and fear and anxiety all come into play. And those, if not managed, can become like deal breakers immediately.
yeah. Oh, I feel like I have so many follow-up questions, but just to pick one slightly different scenario, somebody's been in the job hunt for some time. They're
Mhm.
doing all the things. They're putting out the resumes. They're going to all the interviews when they get them, but nothing's happening. What, in your experience, has supported people in getting over that hump of maybe getting the interviews, but no follow up, or getting the interview, but not actually landing a role?
Yeah, there's a couple of things in that. And, I would want to better understand one, what does the resume look like? So if we are
Sure.
just starting coaching at that point, right? Like what's the story that they're telling and how well is that matching for the roles that they're going after, both on paper, on LinkedIn, as well as then the elevator pitch, the tell me about yourself question to get the ball rolling. And then how are they following through with their interview questions? So I'd want to discover around those things first, right? Is everything syncing up and aligning for them telling the best possible story to get to where they want to go? If there's no follow-up coming out of the interviews, then I think, there's some other questions to be asked around what are they doing to drive closure at the end of the interview to talk about next steps. So there's some real functional things that can come into play. The other thing I would say, and this is where I think I always feel like career coaching gets a little bit into consulting to a degree, where we get into like,
Sure.
do these couple of things, and that might help. But at the end of the day, it's a tough job market right now. There are a lot of people looking for work and looking to evolve their careers, and not a lot of openings. So at the end of the day, it's about who you know.
Sure.
So networking is key. And networking, I always tell people, if you're networking when you start looking for a job, it's already too late, right? Like network always, because you just never know doors are gonna open with the people that you know. Network with the sense of adding value to other people's lives. So when I work with people who are job seeking, it's not just about applying and hopefully getting the interview, but it's about also creating your brand in those walls too. Who do you know that works at the company or has worked at the company? What can they do to vouch for you? Or what can
Mhm.
they do? Because inevitably, if you're connected on LinkedIn, that recruiter is going to be saying, hey, Stu, you know Tami, what do you think about her? Right. So
Yeah.
manage that narrative, right? And then, those kinds of things are what really help make a difference versus just, the obvious of the resume, LinkedIn profile, and interview questions.
I had always heard it said it's not who you know, it's who do you know and what can they say about you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've been in hiring situations, hiring interns at some of my baseball gigs. And sometimes it's been as simple as following up with a reference and them just saying no. And that directly influenced the hiring decision. To Tammy's point, y'all, when you are reaching out to network, how can you add value to the person that you are attempting to, in quotes, network with? I actually don't like the word networking just because I feel like it has kind of a heavy energy and stigma, like, oh, I got to go network. I got to go pass out these business cards. But when you truly come from a place of service, giving something of value that the other person wants, or in your best guess, probably wants, that's how you can actually prove yourself, stand out from the crowd, and more importantly, make sure they remember you, especially when it's like a high touch environment, like a networking event, a party, a meet and greet, whatever the situation might be. I'm curious if you have any follow-up thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's crazy the amount of people that will reach out through LinkedIn and say, "Hey, can you help me with blank?" without, having talked to them for 10 years or, having really had any kind of significant relationship with them. So I do also networking is not my favorite word. I call it relationship building. And that personally for me, when I was
Yeah.
starting my company and getting out, to network, I had to shift my mentality to be about that, right? This is about building relationships. And if you think about it that way, it takes a lot of the pressure off of the feelings that can come with networking, as well as your approach and how you do it, right? So if you're trying to build a relationship with somebody, and just say a new friend, right? You're not going to immediately come out and say, "Hey, will you do such and such for me?" Right? You're going to want to get to know them, understand who they are, what they like, what they don't like, et cetera. And this isn't necessarily about building really close friendships. It can be, but it is about understanding that person so that you're giving back to them and they in return will want to give back to you. Most people candidly love talking about themselves. So I always, say, go at it through that lens of learn about them. They will inevitably ask about you too, right? But if you go through it in the lens of service, adding value, supporting other people, right, the rest will follow.
Yeah. And a coach of mine actually said to myself and another person last night, we are our most interesting when we show up as being interested in the other
Mhm,
person.
mhm.
Like, people will glom onto you, they will be super engaged with you and sharing about themselves because you're doing them the service of caring enough to listen. And especially if you can remember details, whatever devices you use to remember details, it can go a really long way in securing a relationship. And to your point, Tammy, without becoming besties with the person necessarily.
Yeah, and I would say it goes kind of back full circle to where we started on vulnerability, right? You're opening
Yeah.
yourself up to have a connection.
So this kind of bleeds into a question that I wanted to ask you. We're kind of towing the line here between what a coach is and what a consultant is. And you actually touched on it briefly a couple moments ago. It's something that I find happens all the time when people are reaching out for support. They think they want a coach, but in reality they want a consultant. They think they want a consultant, but reality they want a coach. As
Mhm.
somebody who's been in this for as long as you have, how would you explain the difference to people in terms of the two entities as resources themselves?
Yeah, I like to tell people that coaching is the raw definition is the belief that you have all the answers inside of you, and it's my job to help pull them out on the table to then help you decide what to do with them and help you move said decision forward. So I always say it's a lot of asking questions, it's a lot of working through options and angles, and it is not about me telling you what to do. I can
Mhm.
always tell clients a lot, when it gets to that inevitably, and I'm guilty of this with my coach as well. Just tell me what to do, right? When it gets to that situation, I will offer a range of options. Like, here are some things to consider. What does that inspire for you? Just to help kind of like get the ball rolling. But coaching is not about, it's not like the sports coach that we think about, right? We're not pushing drills into you. We're not, telling you to go do this play. It's about you helping you uncover your strengths and how to work with them and make those decisions to move yourself forward. Consulting on the opposite end is still a lot of insight discovery, right? Understanding the what's going on inside, but then it's saying, go do these things. It's kind of more so around the sports coach analogy. And so when I get into especially career coaching situations, I always tell my clients, like, there's a blurred line that happens here, right? Because there are some
Hmm.
things that are just expected in the job search itself, right? And that's when I will flip into consultant mode, and I will tell clients that in the moment, right? Okay, now I'm going to flip into consultant mode and to give you some tips on, what are some things to consider for your resume or whatever that looks like. And I try to just make sure it's very clear going into it, right? Like if you're looking for someone to tell you what to do and to give you more guidance, right? This is probably not, you probably don't need coaching. You want a mentor, you need a consultant, things like that. So I try to just kind of keep it really clear and make sure to kind of call out in the moment too when things might be slipping over so that there's no confusion for the future.
Yeah, and this is something I was putting together as you were sharing that. I feel like possibly people conflate the two because they'll read a book like Brene Brown or see an amazing video on YouTube that inspires them and pumps them up, where the person gives a nugget of information or like a hint at what to do, and that's where they get confused.
Mhm.
Do you feel like there's any validity in that?
For sure. And it's funny because I will often hear my clients say, well, we had a great coaching session. But I know that that definition corporately, right, is let's talk about it. I'm going to ask you some questions, but inevitably we're going to get to some action. Go do the thing, right? And so it's always about that. And maybe we need to figure out a new name for coaching. We need to redefine it, but it is about, kind of understanding the nuances and differences between. And I will, again, I'll be very clear with my clients, like, here are some options to explore. Here's a tidbit of information. What does that inspire in you? Or where does that take you? So it's not about, me saying, go do the thing, or this is the only fact you should consider, right? It's more about what does this do for you and still enabling and empowering that decision. Also goes back to your question on personal power, right? Like we're connecting the dots for people to make those decisions for themselves and really stand in that versus, go do what Tami would do.
And I know for a fact that a lot of coaches and aspiring coaches listen to this podcast. So, just to ask you directly, how do you handle the scenarios where you're pouring into your clients, you're giving them everything you have, you're turning yourself inside out to make it happen, but at the end of the day, they're just not taking action on what you discuss?
Yeah, and unfortunately it happens, right? And so what you do, what I need to do in that situation, right, is to really have an honest heart-to-heart conversation with the client, right, about like what is keeping you from doing this? What is it that you really want? Because there's one of two things happening, right? Like if they're not taking the action to do the thing that they said they wanted to do, either they're not aligned to the end goal, or there's some fear, insecurity, some kind of internal obstacle getting in the way that we haven't yet identified. And so we really got to kind of come take a step back and dig into either or both of those areas to then say, all right, do we need to change the end goal? Or do we need to work through some fear or some of that inner stuff, if you will, that's becoming the obstacle in the way? More often than not, it's the fear. It's something I'm didn't know that I was afraid of. That's holding me back.
Yeah, and it's unbelievable how often it does come back to just some type of fear.
Mhm.
I'm curious, does this same approach you just highlighted, does it work for somebody in a managerial role where they're not getting what they need out of, their colleagues?
Yes and no, right? Because it's the coaching is about them, the manager, right? And so we can only really work through what's going on. So if they're not getting what they need from the people around them, the question is, how much of that is in their control?
Sure.
Are they clearly stating their expectations? Are they working to build those relationships so that everybody's on the same page, et cetera, right? So like coaching will work through what they can do and how they can take action for, but it doesn't control what the other people are doing. So we can work through approaches on how to get other people on board to get to those things. But at the end of the day, they also still have to make their own choices as to whether they're going to do it or not. So the answer is yes and no, right? So there's a lot of things
Mhm.
to uncover and shift for that person and their approach. But It's the whole saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think I want to tie this back to the beginning of the conversation. You're talking about controlling what you can control in this scenario. How is controlling what you can control tied to one's personal power?
Yeah, it's always interesting, and there's a sphere of influence section in Stephen Covey's Seven Habits. If you have read it or not, and I
Mhm.
created a little graph out of it, so I can share it with you if you want to share it out to your audience. But it's basically, we when we understand the things that we can control, it's 9 times out of 10, it's our attitude, our approach, our response, right? Like it's the things that we directly touch and involve, excuse me, which ties back to our personal power because those are our reaction, our strengths, our talents, our things that we want, need out of life. Like that is our personal power. And so when we're focused on those things, it allows us to shift our energy and to really be, fully in charge and in control of what we do, which then has a direct and indirect influence to the people around us. It's amazing what little things that we do that can lead to change in other people without even saying or doing anything specific to them. Like best example, walking down the street and smiling and saying good morning to somebody. Well,
Yeah.
you just made their day because we never say hi to people on the street. You got your head down in your phone or whatever's going on, or telling someone you like their outfit or whatever, right? Like those little tiny, an extra smile, those little things that we do that we can control can have a significant ripple effect to other people.
Yeah. And how hard is it anymore to wish somebody a happy birthday? Just shoot them a little text the morning of and just make sure they know that you're thinking of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm old school. I love sending cards to people for that exact
Yes.
reason, right? Like we don't get mail anymore. If we do, it's all junk mail, right? And not, emails are great, texts are great, but like I love sending a handwritten note to people just to let them know I'm thinking about them.
I love that. I love that. And Tammy, I feel like we could honestly keep the conversation going for, a couple more hours here. We don't have that time today. I want to make sure, again, we talked about the website for your company, WeInspireWe.com. Where else can people connect with you to continue the conversation, to learn more about your coaching services, and just continue the conversation offline?
Yeah, our website is a great place to go to, of course, but we have a LinkedIn presence both for the company and myself. So feel free to reach out to me directly there. It's Tami Chapek. We also are on Facebook and Instagram. So any of those platforms we're watching.
And folks, we will be sure all of Tammy and all of We Inspire We's info is going to be made readily available in the description, in the show notes, so that you can connect with Tammy directly yourself. And Tammy, before we sign out today, this is something I ask every guest that's on this show. What are you acknowledging yourself for today?
Oh, that's a great question. I just get so much joy in having these kinds of conversations. It's just so great to connect with like-minded folks and to be able to share perspective and to be challenged on it too. And so I'm acknowledging myself for, my vulnerability and opening up and sharing some of my philosophies. And I look forward to hearing back from all of you who are listening to this on what worked for you, what connected, what didn't.
And again, Tammy, thank you so much for being here today. We're definitely going to have you back on a future episode. And folks, I know that you got some value out of today's show. So please be sure to like, please subscribe, and please share this out with somebody. Share this with somebody that would benefit as well. And while you're at it, please give the show a 5-star rating. Again, I am your host, Stewart Kraintz. This has been another episode of Your Inside Track to Success. We will catch you next week. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.